The cold came early that year, in Millhaven, Ohio. By the second week of November, the frost had already swallowed the sidewalks whole, coating everything in a thin, gray shell that caught the streetlights and turned them mean. Daniel Carter noticed the cold, the way people who can't afford to not notice things notice everything with his whole body. Through the thin soles of his work boots, through the damp seam along his left collar, where the stitching had finally given out 3 weeks ago, and he hadn't had the $20 to fix it. He was 34 years old and looked 40. Not in the way that some men look older and more distinguished. In the way that hard years etch themselves into a face without asking permission. He worked 2 jobs. The first was a janitorial position at Millhaven Community College, where he mopped floors from 5 in the morning until noon, cleaned restrooms that college students treated with the kind of contempt only available to people who have never had to clean anything in their lives, and emptied trash bins full of half-eaten sandwiches and coffee cups, while his stomach ran on 2 hours of sleep and whatever Lily had left on her plate the night before. The second job was delivery work evenings, 3 or 4 nights a week, driving a battered 2009 Civic that sounded like a pack of loose marbles every time he accelerated above 30 miles per hour, hauling orders of food across the dark streets of Millhaven for tips that sometimes amounted to $2 and sometimes amounted to nothing at all. The apartment on Clearfield Street was not the kind of place people chose, so much as the kind of place that chose them. Unit 4B, second floor. A radiator that hissed and clanged and occasionally smelled like burning plastic. A kitchen window that had been painted shut sometime in the previous decade, and walls so thin that Daniel could hear his neighbor Mr. Poole watching television every night until 11, the laugh tracks bleeding through the plaster like some ghost of someone else's happiness. But it was home. He had made it home. There were drawings of horses and sunshine taped to the refrigerator, because Lily drew horses and sunshine the way other children breathed constantly and without effort. There was a small string of lights above the kitchen table that Lily had picked out from a discount bin at the pharmacy in September, orange and white. And they made the evenings feel warmer than they were. There was a ceramic mug on the windowsill blue, chipped along the rim, that had belonged to his wife Claire, and that Daniel could not bring himself to put away even after 2.5 years. Claire had died from an aggressive form of ovarian cancer when Lily was 5. She had been 31 years old, and she had faced it with a quiet steadiness that Daniel still could not fully comprehend. In the final weeks, propped against the hospital pillows with her dark hair gone and her eyes too large for her face, she had held his hand and said, "The most important thing is that she knows who you are, not what you have. Who you are." Daniel had carried those words like a stone in his chest ever since. Lily was 8 now. She was sharp in the way that children who have been asked to grow up a little faster than other children become sharp. She noticed things. She noticed when Daniel came home tired. She noticed when the crackers in the cabinet had not been restocked because restocking them had not been possible that week. She noticed, and she said nothing about it, which was somehow the hardest thing of all. She was doing her homework at the kitchen table when he left for his delivery shift on that particular Friday night in November. She was wearing her coat indoors because the radiator had been making the burning plastic smell again, and Daniel had cracked the window, and it had let the cold in. She had her orange and white lights on, and her colored pencils arranged in a deliberate row, and a worksheet about fractions spread in front of her. "I'll be back by 10, he told her. Mrs. Pulaski across the hall, a 70-year-old woman with knees like bad weather and a heart like summer, had agreed to check on Lily at 8 and again at 9. It was an arrangement they had all arrived at without speaking about it directly, the way certain necessary things get arranged between people who understand each other's situation. "Okay, Daddy." Lily didn't look up from her fractions. Then, just as he was pulling the door closed, "Be careful on the ice." He stopped. "I will. The ice on the left side of the stairs is worse," she said. "I saw it this morning." He stood in the doorway for a moment looking at her 8 years old, in her coat, with her colored pencils in a row, explaining to him which side of the stairs was more dangerous. He felt something move through him that he didn't have a precise word for. "Thanks, sweetheart," he said. "I'll go right." The Civic started on the 3rd try. What Daniel did not know, as he pulled out of the parking lot into the cold dark of Millhaven's Friday night, was that there was an envelope tucked under his windshield wiper. not a note, not a parking ticket, but something that had been deposited there by the wind, by chance. By the simple, indifferent mechanics of a winter evening. He did not discover it until he reached his first delivery stop on the other side of town. He pulled it out from under the wiper where the wind had plastered it, and he almost threw it away. He assumed it was a flyer, one of those restaurant coupons or real estate advertisements that appeared on cars in Millhaven as reliably as the frost. Then he felt the weight. He sat in the Civic with the engine running and the heat blowing lukewarm air from the vents, and he opened the envelope. What was inside stopped the air in his lungs. 100 bills, each one $100. Daniel counted them twice. Then a third time, his fingers moving through the stack with the slow deliberateness of a man who does not trust himself to be seeing what he is seeing. He counted them again. 100 bills, $10,000. There was nothing else in the envelope. No name, no note, no return address. Just the money, dense and clean, held together with a paper band. He sat very still. Outside, Millhaven's Friday night moved around him a couple, walking fast against the cold. A group of young men heading toward the bar on 5th. A delivery truck blocking the far lane with its hazards on. The world continuing its business, while Daniel Carter sat in his Civic with $10,000 in a white envelope and a mind that had gone very, very quiet. He could construct the argument, even now, sitting in the cold. He could build it brick by brick, and it would hold. The money had no name on it. There was only a business card, a card that had merely been near the envelope, not inside it, not attached, not labeled. Perhaps the money had been lost long before it reached his windshield wiper. Perhaps the card and the envelope had no connection at all, were just two separate things the wind had gathered together, the way wind gathers anything, indifferently. Perhaps the person who had lost it was not the person on the card, but someone else entirely, someone anonymous and untraceable, and therefore the money was as close to ownerless as money ever became. He ran this through his head twice. It was a reasonable argument. It was also, and he knew this with the clarity of a man who has spent years being honest with himself because dishonesty takes too much energy to maintain. Completely false. Not factually. It was factually defensible. But it was not honest. He knew the card and the envelope went together. He knew it the way you know certain things, not because you can prove them, but because you understand, in the wordless immediate way, that the body understands temperature, that they are true. He thought about Lily. He thought about the boots with the crack in the sole. He thought about the notice that was probably already waiting under the door. He thought about a version of himself who kept the money, who told himself the story about the wind and the coincidence and the untraceable owner, who paid the rent and bought the boots and fixed the brakes and slept fine for a week, and then stopped sleeping fine and never quite understood why. He thought about having to look Lily in the eye. He almost missed it. He would have missed it had the card not been there. A small white card that must have been tucked inside the envelope and had slipped free when he opened it, and which he only noticed when he leaned forward to check the floor. He picked it up. It was a business card, embossed. The kind that costs real money to print. The name on it read, Harriet Weston. Below that, Weston Capital Group. And below that, an address in the Ashford Hills neighborhood on the north side of Millhaven. He turned the card over. Blank. He sat with the envelope in his lap and the card in his hand, and tried to think. $10,000. He did not have to work through the math. He had been living with the math for months. 3 months behind on rent. The total owed to his landlord, Vincent Greer, was $4,200. Lily needed new winter boots. Hers had developed a crack along the sole that let water in. His car registration was overdue. He had a doctor's bill from August, when Lily had gotten strep throat, that he had been paying in $60 increments, and which still had over $300 left on it. The Civic needed new brake pads, had needed them since September. A fact that occupied a small, constant place in his awareness every time he drove. $10,000 would erase all of it. It would more than erase all of it. It would leave him with enough to breathe for the first time in years. He could feel his hands on the wheel in the dark. And he thought about the night Claire had said what she'd said. Not what you have. Who you are. He thought about Lily at the kitchen table with her colored pencils in a row. He thought about the address on the card. He put the Civic in drive. He finished his remaining deliveries first. There were 3: a pizza order in the Kellerman district, a bag of Thai food to an apartment complex on Morrison, a sandwich order to a man at a hotel near the airport, who opened the door in a suit and looked past Daniel as he handed over the bag, the way certain people look past other people. Daniel drove carefully on the icy roads. He thought about Lily's advice, go right on the stairs. By the time his shift was technically over, it was 9:15. He sat in a parking lot on Dunmore Street and held the envelope in both hands and had the longest conversation with himself he'd ever had in a parking lot. The man who had raised him, his grandfather. Arthur Carter. A retired railroad worker, with enormous hands and a blunt, clear way of speaking, had told him once that there were very few moments in a life that you could point to afterward and say, that was the one. Most decisions, Arthur said, are just habit dressed up as choice. But occasionally, rarely, you get a real one. And those you remember. Daniel thought this might be one of those. He started the Civic and drove north toward Ashford Hills. The Ashford Hills neighborhood existed in a different weather system, or so it seemed. The streets were wider and lit by lights that actually worked. The driveways held cars that had been purchased in this decade. The houses sat back from the road behind lawns that, even in November, maintained a certain dignity. Daniel had been to Ashford Hills before for deliveries, occasionally. He always felt slightly alien there, not with resentment but with the low-grade awareness of someone moving through a space they were not expected to occupy. The address on the card led him to a colonial on Whitmore Lane, a house with a stone facade and warm yellow light in the windows. He sat in his Civic at the curb for a moment, the engine clicking as it cooled, the envelope on the passenger seat. He walked to the door and knocked. A woman answered. She was perhaps 60, with silver hair cut short, wearing a dark blazer over a pale blouse, dressed at 9:30 on a Friday night. In the way that some people are always dressed, as if they conduct their entire lives at a certain register of formality. Her face was intelligent and contained. The kind of face that had learned to give very little away. When she saw Daniel, his work clothes, his worn boots, his face drawn with a long shift, something moved behind her eyes. A wariness. Then, as she took in the envelope in his hand, something else replaced it. Something harder to name. My name is Daniel Carter, he said. I found this near my car tonight. I think this belongs to you. He held out the envelope. There was a card inside. The woman looked at the envelope for a long moment. Then she reached out and took it. She opened it, and whatever she had been holding in her expression released slightly, not into warmth exactly, but into something that was the precursor to it. Do you know how much money is in here? She said. Yes, ma'am. And you drove all the way to Ashford Hills to return it? Yes, ma'am. She looked at him. Come inside for a moment. I'm fine out here, thank you. Please, she said. And there was something in the word that wasn't quite a request and wasn't quite an order, but occupied the space between them with a quiet authority. He came inside. The foyer was the kind of space that had been thought about. A painting on the wall. Dark wood floors. A side table with a vase of flowers, real ones. She led him into a study off the main hall bookshelves, a wide desk, a lamp casting a warm pool of light, and turned to face him. My name is Harriet Weston, she said. That money was for a charitable trust I manage. I keep a significant amount on hand for end-of-year disbursements. I was on my way to a meeting this afternoon, and I must have dropped it getting in and out of the car. She paused. I want to give you a portion of it, as a reward. No, thank you, Daniel said. That's a great deal of money to return without asking for anything. It wasn't mine. She studied him with an interest that had moved beyond the transaction. Are you all right? Financially? He almost said yes. The habit of yes was deep in him, the working-class reflex of not admitting to struggle in front of people who wouldn't struggle the same way. because the admission felt like a different kind of loss. "Not particularly," he said instead. "What do you do?" he told her. She listened without expression. Then she asked about Lily, and he wasn't sure how she knew to ask, except that perhaps she had noticed the way he glanced at the time on his phone. He left 20 minutes later. She had not pressed the reward again after the second refusal. She had walked him to the door and said, "Mr. Carter." And when he turned, she held his gaze for a moment. Some things in this life take a long time to arrive, but they arrive. He drove home through the cold. He did not feel noble. He felt exhausted and frightened, and certain that he had done the right thing, and uncertain about almost everything else. The letter from Vincent Greer, his landlord, had been slid under the apartment door sometime during the evening. Daniel found it when he came in just before 10, stepping carefully around it in the dark before he realized what it was and turned on the kitchen light. It was a formal notice printed on Greer Property Management letterhead, the language precise and bloodless, in the way that legal documents about human situations are always precise and bloodless. Notice to vacate. You have 48 hours from the date of this notice to either remit payment in full or vacate the premises at Unit 4B, 318 Clearfield Street. He read it twice. Then he folded it carefully along its original creases and set it on the kitchen table, next to Lily's homework, which she had stacked in a neat pile before Mrs. Pulaski had taken her to bed. He stood in the kitchen for a while. He made tea, because making tea gave his hands something to do. He sat at the table with Claire's chipped blue mug and the string of orange and white lights above him and a 48-hour notice and approximately $11 in his checking account. He had done the right thing. He was completely certain of this. He was also completely terrified. The next day was Saturday. He had no delivery shift. He had the morning cleaning position at the college until noon. And when he came home, Lily was watching a nature documentary on the small television in the living room, lying on her stomach with her chin in her hands, utterly absorbed by something about elk migrations across frozen ground. "Dad," she said, without looking up, "did you know that elk can smell danger from a mile away?" "I did not know that," he said. "They travel in herds because it's safer. Even the ones that are really fast still travel with the slow ones." She glanced at him. "Because being together is better than being fast alone. That's a good lesson," he said. "I thought so," she agreed, and turned back to the elk. He spent the afternoon calling numbers. A credit union about a personal loan denied, because his credit was 3 years of debt management and 2 late payments away from the kind of score that unlocked anything. A social services office there were programs. But the soonest anyone could review his application was 6 weeks. 6 weeks. He called his cousin Brent in Columbus, who had a family of his own, and a situation that was, if anything, harder. By 3 in the afternoon he was sitting on the bathroom floor with his back against the tub, because it was the only place in the apartment where Lily couldn't see him, and he allowed himself 5 minutes, he counted them, looking at his phone, of allowing himself to feel the full weight of where he was. Then he washed his face, went back out, started making dinner. Sunday morning. The knock on the door was Vincent Greer's, and Greer had brought with him the property manager, a younger man named Stokes, whose job it was to stand slightly behind Greer and look official. Greer was a heavy-set man in his late 50s with a gray mustache and the manner of someone who had been disappointed by people for so long that disappointment had calcified into contempt. "Carter," he said when Daniel opened the door. "Mr. Greer, you have the money?" Lily had appeared at Daniel's elbow. She looked at Greer with the direct, unblinking gaze of a child who has not yet learned to perform deference. "I don't have it today," Daniel said. "I'm working on it. I need more time." Greer looked at him, the way a man looks at something he has already decided about. "I've given you time, Carter. 3 months of time. I have other tenants on a waiting list for this unit. I understand that. I'm asking for 1 more week. My office sent the legal notice. 48 hours. It's 48 hours to respond. I'm responding. I'm asking for 1 week to get the money together." Greer's gaze moved to Lily, then back to Daniel. "I'm sorry about your situation," he said, in a tone that suggested he was not especially sorry. "But I have a business to run. If you don't have the arrears by tomorrow evening, I'm going to have to proceed." He and Stokes turned and walked down the hall. Daniel closed the door very quietly. Lily put her small hand in his. She didn't say anything. He held her hand and looked at the kitchen with its string of orange and white lights, and tried to think about what to do next. By Monday evening, they were in the hallway. Not all of their things, there was nowhere to put all of their things. But several boxes, the 2 duffel bags of clothes, the small crate with the kitchen essentials, that Daniel had packed with the focused efficiency of someone who has had to perform awful tasks before, and knows that the way to get through them is one step at a time. The ceramic blue mug was wrapped in a dish towel inside one of the bags. He had packed it last. He had stood in the kitchen with it, in both hands, its familiar weight, the particular smoothness of the glaze that Claire had chosen because she liked the color and because it was on sale at the craft market on Hendricks Avenue 7 years ago, and he had thought about all the mornings he had wrapped his hands around it while Lily slept, in the gray early light before either of them was quite ready to begin the day. It was just a mug. He knew that. But it was also the last object in the apartment that still carried her in any immediate, physical sense, the weight of it, the temperature it held, the way it fit his hand. He wrapped it carefully and put it in the bag. His neighbor across from Mrs. Pulaski, a younger man named Kevin Brandt, who worked at the auto parts store, and whom Daniel had always been on decent terms with, stood in his own doorway and watched without saying anything. Daniel understood. There was nothing to say. The woman in 4C, a nurse named Patricia, who Daniel had helped carry groceries upstairs twice during a particularly bad winter storm 2 years ago, emerged briefly and then retreated back inside. He understood that too. When catastrophe happens to someone near you, the instinct is often to look away not from cruelty, but from the recognition that you cannot fix it, and your presence only underlines its reality. The hallway smelled of someone's cooking on the 3rd floor, something warm and savory. The contrast was almost unbearable. Lily sat on her box of things with her stuffed bear, whose name was Theodore, held in both arms. She was not crying. She was doing the thing she did when something was very wrong. Her face had gone very still, and she was not looking at anything in particular. Looking instead at some middle distance, only she could see. "Are we going to the shelter?" she asked. "We're going to figure this out," Daniel said. "But are we going to the shelter tonight?" He crouched down in front of her. "I called Mrs. Pulaski's cousin. We can stay at her place in Renfield tonight, and probably tomorrow. And I'm going to figure out the rest." She nodded. Not with relief, she was too old for easy relief, but with the specific trust of a child who has decided that her father's word is a stable thing in an unstable world. He did not take that trust lightly. He was terrified of it. He was loading the second duffel into the Civic, parked in the cold at the curb, when headlights came around the corner of Clearfield Street. He didn't look up. Cars came around that corner all the time, but the car slowed. It stopped. It was a black sedan, not a luxury car, in the flashy, conspicuous way, but in the way of serious money, the kind that doesn't need to be obvious. It idled at the curb, and the engine was so quiet you could almost convince yourself it wasn't on. The back door opened. Harriet Weston stepped out. She was dressed as she had been on Friday night, blazer, pale blouse, silver hair. She looked at Daniel with the same contained, watchful intelligence. Then she looked at the bags on the sidewalk, the boxes, Lily sitting on a crate with Theodore pressed against her chest. She looked for a long moment. Her face did not change in any dramatic way, but something in it shifted, something very small and very definitive. "Mr. Carter," she said. He straightened. "Miss Weston, I need to speak with you." From the front hallway of the building, the door still propped open from Daniel's loading, Vincent Greer appeared. He had apparently been waiting inside to confirm the departure. He saw the black sedan. He saw Harriet Weston. Something moved across his face that was not quite recognition, but was adjacent to it, the face of a man who has encountered a category of person he did not expect to encounter in his particular Tuesday evening. Weston turned to look at Greer. "Are you the property owner?" she asked. Greer blinked. "The property manager. I handle Clearfield Properties on behalf of the holding company." "And who is the holding company?" A beat. Weston Capital, ma'am. The silence that followed was exactly as loud as it needed to be. Greer's face had undergone a rapid reorganization. He looked at Harriet Weston. Several things were happening in his expression simultaneously, and none of them were things he would have chosen to be visible. Kevin Brandt, who had reappeared in the doorway of his apartment, was watching with his arms crossed, and the expression of a man who has underestimated the entertainment value of this particular Monday evening. "I see," Greer said, carefully. "I imagine you do," Weston said. What happened next did not take long. And that was part of what made it so complete. Harriet Weston did not raise her voice. She was not theatrical. She stood on the sidewalk in front of 318 Clearfield Street in the cold November air, with the kind of authority that doesn't need to announce itself, and she spoke to Vincent Greer in a tone that was measured and final and clear. Weston Capital Group, she explained, had acquired Clearfield properties as part of a larger real estate portfolio 18 months ago. Greer managed the properties on their behalf. He received a management fee and operated within guidelines set by the holding company. Guidelines that she said this carefully included provisions regarding how tenants in financial difficulty were to be handled, provisions that did not include 48-hour eviction notices delivered by hand on Sundays. Greer began to say something about terms and legal notice periods. Weston listened to approximately 2 sentences of this before she said, quietly, "Mr. Greer, this man works 2 jobs. He has an 8-year-old daughter. He came to my home on a Friday night to return $10,000 that he had found near his car." She paused. "He did this instead of keeping money that would have solved his immediate problem. I think you understand what that tells me about him." Another silence. "The arrears will be absorbed," she said. "The account will be settled as of today. And I'd like you to arrange for the heating system in this unit to be properly serviced. The management notes show 4 maintenance requests in the past year." She glanced at the building. Tonight, Greer did not argue. He pulled out his phone and made a call. Lily, still sitting on her crate with Theodore, was watching all of this with the focused attention she gave to elk migrations and fraction worksheets. She looked at Weston, and Weston looked at her, and something passed between them that Daniel couldn't quite see from where he stood. Weston walked over to where Lily sat. She crouched down, which was not a thing. Daniel noticed that she did easily, a woman of 60 with careful joints, and said, at Lily's level, "Your father is a very honorable man." Lily considered this. "I know," she said. Weston smiled, small, genuine, the first fully unguarded expression she had produced all evening. "You look like a young woman who already knew that." "I've always known," Lily said. "I just didn't know other people would figure it out." They carried the boxes back inside. Kevin Brandt helped without being asked, picking up a duffel bag and following Daniel up the stairs, with the natural ease of someone who has been looking for a way to be useful and has just been given one. Mrs. Pulaski had come out of her apartment and was standing with Lily. And by the time the boxes were back in the apartment, she had produced a container of soup from somewhere beef barley, still warm, in a plastic tub with the efficiency of a woman who has always understood that the most useful thing you can offer a family in crisis is food. The radiator man arrived at 8 o'clock. He was a heavy-set man named Lou, who carried his tools without ceremony and went directly to the unit's heating system without making conversation. He found, in addition to the burning plastic smell, a worn seal, a pressure issue that had been causing the clanging, and a blockage in the line that had been reducing output by nearly 40%. He fixed all 3. By 9, the apartment was warm, in a way it had not been warm since Daniel had moved in. Harriet Weston, before she left, had spoken to Daniel privately in the hallway. "I want to offer you a position," she said. "Weston Capital manages 32 residential properties in this city. I've been looking for a property coordinator, someone who works directly with tenants, handles maintenance requests, liaises with contractors, keeps the management side honest." She said this last part without inflection, but it landed. "The salary is honest. There are benefits. It is regular work." Daniel looked at her. "Why?" "Because I need someone in that role who knows what it's like to be on the other side of a lease agreement." She met his eyes. "And because I've been in this business for 30 years and I know what it means when a man returns $10,000 on a night when he needs it most, It means he's the kind of person I don't often come across. I don't have formal property management experience. I'm not looking for a credential, she said. I have people with credentials. I'm looking for someone with judgment. He thought about it for exactly the amount of time a person thinks about something when the answer is already obvious, but responsibility requires that you take the question seriously. All right, he said. She nodded. Monday. I'll have my office send the details. She left, and her sedan pulled quietly into the dark. The apartment held its warmth. Daniel sat at the kitchen table after Lily had gone to sleep a slightly later bedtime than usual, allowed by the extraordinary nature of the evening, filled with soup and questions, and the particular kind of exhausted happiness that comes from a crisis that has resolved itself in a direction you weren't permitted to hope for. She had asked at dinner to hear the story from the beginning. What had happened on Friday night? All of it. So he told her. He told it plainly, without drama, the way he tried always to tell her things. He told her about the parking lot and the counting and the card. He told her about the house on Whitmore Lane and the woman with the silver hair. He told her about the conversation in the study. Lily had listened with her spoon hovering over the soup bowl, not eating, which was how he knew she was truly absorbed. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "So the right thing was also the hard thing." "Yes. But you did it anyway." "Yes." She considered this with the gravity she brought to all things that mattered. "That's the actual test," she said. "Anybody can do the right thing when it's easy." She went back to her soup. "That's not really a test." He sat with that for a long time after she went to bed. He sat with Claire's blue mug, and the orange and white lights, and the silence that a warm apartment makes, when everything in it is exactly where it should be. He thought about Arthur Carter, his grandfather, and his theory about real decisions. He thought about the parking lot on Dunmore Street, the envelope in his hands, the card with the Ashford Hills address. He thought about how the decision had not felt brave in the moment. It had felt like the only thing he could actually do, not because it was easy, but because the alternative was to become someone he couldn't explain to Lily. Not because she would have found out, necessarily, but because he would have known, and the knowing would have been present in every exchange between them for the rest of their lives. A small, silent weight underneath everything. He had not done it for the reward. He understood that. But he also understood that the universe does not arrange things neatly on a timeline of your choosing, and that Friday night in Dunmore Street had been the consequence of something of years of doing the smaller, unremarkable version of the same choice, over and over, in ways that no one was watching and no one would ever know. He took his phone out and looked at the job details email that had arrived while he was helping Kevin carry boxes. The title was Property Coordination Manager. The salary was more than he had earned in his 2 jobs combined by a significant margin. The benefits included health insurance full coverage, which meant the August strep throat bill was the last of its kind, and that Lily's annual checkups would stop being a calculation he had to make about what he could postpone. He read the email twice, and then set the phone face down on the table and finished his tea. Outside, Millhaven was quiet. The frost was still on everything, but the light from the street lamp came through the window at an angle that made the ice on the rooftop across the alley look almost beautiful, each crystal holding its own small piece of the light, arranged in no particular pattern, making a kind of accidental brightness out of the cold. He thought Claire would have laughed at how the whole thing worked out. She had laughed like that, delighted by the unexpected geometry of things, by the way life would sometimes, rarely, organize itself into a shape that made sense from a sufficient distance. She had always believed that the shape was there, even when you couldn't see it. Especially then. He turned off the kitchen light. He checked on Lily. She was sleeping with Theodore, tucked under one arm, and her face arranged in the particular piece of children who have had a full day of feeling and have released it all into sleep. He adjusted her blanket. He went to bed. The alarm went off at 4:50, as it always had. He lay still for a moment, feeling the warmth of the apartment, listening for the hiss and clang of the radiator. Nothing. Just the steady, neutral hum of a system working properly. He had not heard that before. It was remarkable how quiet a place got when things worked the way they were supposed to. He showered. He made coffee. He looked at the clock. Today was his last day at the college. He had called his supervisor there, a patient man named Howard Baxter, the evening before, and explained the situation without going into detail. Howard had been gracious about it, which didn't surprise Daniel. Howard was the kind of man who understood that people's lives reorganized themselves sometimes and treated it accordingly. He had wished Daniel well and told him that the job would be posted, but that he hoped Daniel knew he'd been a reliable part of the team. It was not nothing, being told that. He drove to the college through the early dark. He mopped the floors of the east wing and the main corridor with the same care he always brought to the work, not because anyone was watching, but because he was there, and the floors needed mopping, and this was the last time he would do it, and he wanted to do it right. He cleaned the restrooms. He emptied the trash bins. He said goodbye to Maureen at the front desk, who gave him a look that was complicated and warm and a little sad, and he thanked her for the years of good mornings. He was home by noon. Lily came home from school at 3:15. She dropped her backpack at the door with the thunderous abandon of a child who has been carrying it for 7 hours, and drops it at the threshold as a kind of declaration of arrival. And she said, "I told Madison that you got a new job." "Who's Madison?" "My friend who sits next to me." Lily went to the kitchen and opened the cabinet. She said her dad got a new job too. He works in computers. She found the crackers restocked that morning, along with several other items. She turned around with the box. "Do we have cheese?" "Left side of the fridge." She assembled her snack with the focused efficiency that was her hallmark and climbed onto the kitchen chair. She ate 3 crackers thoughtfully. Then she said, without looking up, "I knew you'd do the right thing, Daddy." He had been putting away a glass. He stopped. "That night," she said, "when you found the money." She looked at him now. "I knew you'd give it back." "How did you know I found money?" "I didn't," she said simply. "I just knew that whatever the right thing was, you'd do it." She returned to her crackers. "You always do. It just sometimes takes a while for everyone else to figure that out." He stood in the kitchen of the warm apartment with the orange and white lights and Claire's blue mug on the windowsill, and his daughter eating crackers with the calm certainty of someone who has already settled all the questions that seem large from the outside. He thought about what Harriet Weston had said on Friday night at the door of the house on Whitmore Lane. Some things in this life take a long time to arrive, but they arrive. He thought about it differently now than he had then. He had assumed she was speaking about reward, about the eventual return of good behavior, the universe balancing its books. But standing in the kitchen watching Lily eat her crackers, he understood she had meant something more specific and less transactional than that. She had meant that the man you build yourself to be, in all the small, unremarkable moments when no one is watching in parking lots, in the face of 48-hour notices, at the kitchen table, with a mug of tea and a legal letter and $11 in the bank, that man eventually becomes visible. Not to the universe in some abstract sense, but to the people who matter, to the people whose estimation of you is the one that counts. Lily had always known. That was the thing. She had always, somehow, already known. 3 weeks later, in the second week of December, Daniel Carter sat at a desk in a building on Halloran Street for the first time in his life, a desk that was his, with a computer that was his, in an office that had his name on a small card in a slot outside the door. He had spent the morning reviewing maintenance logs for properties across the South District, speaking with contractors, following up on 2 tenant requests that had been sitting in the system longer than they should have been. He had called both tenants personally. The first was a woman named Ruth, elderly, who had reported a leaking pipe in her kitchen ceiling. The pipe had been logged 6 weeks ago, and no contractor had been assigned. He had found the file buried in a queue, flagged as low priority, by some previous assessment that had not considered what it was like to put a bucket under a ceiling leak in December. Daniel had an HVAC and plumbing contractor at her apartment by 2 in the afternoon. She had called the main office afterward, which routed to his desk, and said she wanted to thank whoever was responsible. "That was me," Daniel told her. "Well," she said, "that was the fastest anyone at this company has ever done anything. I'm going to try to make that normal," he said. There was a pause on her end of the line. Then, "Good." Another pause. "I've been a tenant in this building for 11 years. I'd like that very much. He hung up and sat quietly for a moment, looking at the maintenance queue. There were 23 outstanding requests. He worked through them methodically, the way he had mopped floors one at a time, with attention, in the right order. The second tenant was a young couple, the Castellanos, recent arrivals, both working, with a 2-year-old and a broken heating unit that had been waiting for parts. He located the parts. He had the unit repaired by Thursday. He sent them a note, a handwritten one, on company stationery acknowledging that the delay had been too long and that he was sorry for it. He was not sure if the note was unusual in this context. It felt like the right thing, which, he had come to understand, was usually a sufficient reason. They sent back a card with a small drawing from the 2-year-old. Indecipherable shapes in green and yellow crayon. A sun, possibly, or a flower, or a person with enormous arms. He taped it to his desk. Harriet Weston stopped by his office on his 4th day. She stood in the doorway and looked at the drawing on the wall, and then at him. "The Castellano file," she said. "Yes, you sent a handwritten note." "I did." She considered this. "That's not standard practice." "I know. It should be," she said, and left. He thought about that for the rest of the afternoon. Lily got new winter boots the 2nd week of December. They were waterproof and had a good sole, and when she put them on, she walked around the apartment in them with the particular gravity of someone testing a significant acquisition. "They're warm," she reported. "Good." "Theodore is jealous," she said. "He doesn't have boots." "Theodore is a bear," Daniel pointed out. "Bears need boots too," Lily said, with the air of someone explaining something obvious to someone who should know better. He bought her a miniature pair of wool slippers that could pass for Theodore's boots, from a craft store downtown, for $3. She arranged them on Theodore's feet with tremendous seriousness and pronounced the situation resolved. The frost stayed through January, which is what frost does in Millhaven, but the apartment was warm. The radiator hissed and clanged. No more. It ran quiet, the way systems run when they have been properly attended to. The orange and white lights stayed up past Christmas. Lily had decided they made the kitchen better year-round, a position Daniel found entirely reasonable. The blue mug sat on the windowsill. The drawings of horses in sunshine covered the refrigerator. Nothing was resolved in the way that things resolve in stories cleanly, completely, with the sense that the difficulty has been permanently concluded. There were still hard months ahead, in the way that life contains hard months without asking your permission. There were still the smaller struggles of a man raising a daughter alone on a salary that was better than it had been but was not without its limits. There were the grief-shaped silences that still arrived. Sometimes, in the evenings, the moments when the apartment held too much of Claire's absence, when Lily asked a question that would have been a conversation between two parents and became instead a single man doing his best. But there was also this. A man who had sat in a parking lot on a Friday night in November, with $10,000 in his hands, and chosen, in full knowledge of what it would cost him, to do the thing that let him remain himself. There was a child who had always known he would. There was a warm apartment in the winter. There was a job with a desk and a card with his name on it, and a 2-year-old's drawing in green and yellow crayon, taped to the wall. There were elk, migrating together across frozen ground. Not because it was faster, because being together was better than being fast alone. He thought about that often, in the months that followed. He thought about it when he was reviewing a maintenance log, and imagining the person on the other side of the file, the woman with the leaking ceiling, the young family with the broken heat, the older man on the west side whose building's common entrance door didn't close properly, and who had been writing request forms for 7 months. He thought about it when he was sitting across from Harriet Weston in a Tuesday afternoon meeting, and she was explaining the long-term vision for the portfolio, the way she wanted the properties managed, the standards she was trying to build. She did not use the word care in those meetings, but everything she said was organized around it. He understood that she had spent 30 years in a business that made it easy not to think of tenants as people, and that she had decided, at some point, to think of them as people anyway. He did not know when she had made that decision or what had prompted it. He knew that it had made her harder to work, for the standard was higher. The work was more demanding. The threshold for what counted as acceptable was lower, and that it had also made the work meaningful in a way that was difficult to explain to people who had not experienced it. He tried to be worthy of the standard. Most days he believed he was. Some days he was not sure. But he showed up, and he paid attention. And when things went wrong, which they did, because things went wrong in any operation of sufficient scale, he acknowledged it and corrected it and moved forward. He was learning that integrity was not a single large act. It was the accumulation of small ones, performed consistently, in the absence of anyone keeping score. He had learned this from his grandfather. He had reinforced it in a parking lot on Dunmore Street. He was still learning it every day. In February, he received a card in the office mail. It was from Ruth, the woman with the leaking ceiling, the 11-year tenant. She had written in a careful, deliberate hand, "Thank you for treating me like someone worth taking care of. It has been a long time since anyone in property management has done that." She had signed it with her full name, Ruth Eleanor Aldridge, with the formality of someone who understood that certain things deserved their full weight. He put it on his desk, next to the green and yellow crayon drawing. He did not have a name for what it was that he was building. In the apartment on Clearfield Street, and in the office on Halloran Street, and in the small daily decisions that most people would never see. But he knew what it felt like from the inside. It felt like being the person his daughter had always believed he was. That, he had decided, was enough. More than enough. That was everything.